Let's start with a question that's been grabbing headlines for years. Is China buying the world? From newspapers to TV debates, you've probably heard warnings that China's massive economy and growing companies are scooping up assets everywhere. This idea has sparked anxiety and debate, especially in Western countries. Today, we're going to look beyond the headlines and dig into what's really happening, using evidence, not rhetoric. China is now the world's second biggest economy and its largest exporter. It has more foreign exchange reserves than any other country, a sign of just how much trade and money flow through its borders. And when you look at lists of the world's largest companies, like the Financial Times 500, you'll find 29 Chinese firms on there. No wonder people are paying attention. But with all this growth comes a wave of stories suggesting that China is using its financial power to buy up companies and resources around the globe. Some commentators describe it as if China is on a shopping spree, snapping up businesses, real estate, and even entire industries in other countries. The phrase "China is buying the world" has become a kind of shorthand for these fears. This question isn't just about economics, it's about power. When people worry about China buying the world, they're really asking who will shape the future of business, technology, and influence on a global scale. Will China control key industries? Will it outpace countries that have traditionally held economic sway? These are big questions because they touch on jobs, technology, national security, and even daily life for millions of people worldwide. Understanding what's true and what's exaggerated is essential for making sense of our changing world. Let's back up a little to see how we got here. Since the 1970s, there's been a huge shift in how global business works. Big companies from high-income countries, think the US, Europe, Japan, have grown even bigger and expanded their reach. These multinational firms often have cutting-edge technology and some of the most famous brands. As these companies went global, they looked for new markets to sell to and new places to produce goods. China became central to this story. With its large population and fast-growing economy, it attracted massive investment from abroad. Factories sprang up all over, making everything from electronics to cars. In fact, multinational companies are responsible for more than 2/3 of China's high-tech output and over 90% of its high-tech exports. So, while it might look like China is exporting its way to domination, much of what's made in China actually comes from factories owned or controlled by companies from outside China. These global firms are deeply embedded within China's economy, and many are pushing to do even more business there. On one side, some Western commentators argue that with such economic muscle, plus those huge foreign exchange reserves, China is using its resources to buy up important businesses and assets around the world. The idea is that if Chinese companies own enough critical infrastructure or technology in other countries, they could gain too much influence. But let's look at what Peter Nolan, a leading scholar on China and global business, has found. He points out that while Chinese companies are growing, their presence in wealthier countries remains tiny compared to Western firms' presence inside China. Here's an example. While multinational companies account for most of China's advanced manufacturing and exports, Chinese companies have only a small foothold in industries or assets in places like the US or Europe. In other words, Western companies are inside China in a big way, but Chinese firms are not nearly as inside Western economies. And when it comes to technology and global brands, the real engines of modern economic power, China still lags behind. The country has about 70 large national champion firms. These companies get plenty of support from the Chinese government and tend to work in areas like banking, metals, mining, energy, transport, and telecommunications. But here's the catch. They mostly use high-tech products rather than create them. What does this mean? China is strong in industries that rely on buying or applying technology, but it hasn't yet managed to build a group of companies with world-leading technologies or instantly recognizable brands like Apple or Google. Another important point, China's big firms, the so-called national champions, are often state-owned or enjoy significant government backing. This support helps them grow rapidly at home. Their main strength comes from dominating China's domestic market, not from conquering global markets. Some analysts believe this government support makes it harder for foreign firms to compete inside China, which is why there's ongoing tension about trade rules and market access. But again, when you look at how much influence Chinese firms have outside their home country, especially in high-income economies, it's still quite limited. So where does this leave us? According to Peter Nolan's research, the idea that China is buying the world just doesn't hold up under closer inspection. Yes, China is a major player in global trade and has built up powerful companies at home. But when you look at the global picture, especially in high-tech industries or truly international business, Chinese firms are nowhere near as dominant as some headlines suggest. In fact, more often than not, it's Western multinationals that hold sway inside China, not the other way around. While Chinese investment abroad is growing, it's still small compared to what Western firms have invested in China itself. The future isn't set in stone. China wants to build globally competitive firms with leading technology and brands, but so far, it hasn't fully succeeded. Whether it will manage to catch up in these areas remains uncertain. Debate continues over how open markets should be and what level of government support is fair when it comes to international competition. Both sides, China and Western countries, are trying to find ways to protect their own interests while also benefiting from trade and investment links. It's also worth noting that concerns about foreign investment aren't new or unique to China. Many countries have faced similar worries when new economic players rise on the world stage. To sum up, while stories about China buying the world make for attention-grabbing headlines, they don't tell the whole story. The data shows that Chinese companies have much less presence in developed economies than Western firms have in China. Most of China's powerful companies rely on their home market and government support rather than dominating abroad with top-tier technology or brands. The real picture is more nuanced than either fear or hype suggests. Global business remains deeply interconnected, with powerful Western companies still playing a leading role inside China itself. For anyone trying to understand who really holds power in today's economy and where things might go next, it pays to look past the headlines and focus on the facts. Stay tuned as this story develops. Change is constant in the world economy. For now, though, claims that China is buying the world seem far more myth than reality, a reminder that not everything we hear about global power shifts stands up to closer scrutiny.